The letter arrived without a seal but carried weight heavier than any royal crest. It was hand-delivered by a Saudi diplomat to the presidential palace in Ouagadougou under the highest discretion. At first glance, it seemed ordinary, a polite invitation to the Riyadh Vision 2035 forum. But to President Ibrahim Traoré, the meaning was unmistakable. This wasn't an invitation. It was a test. The note was brief. His Royal Highness Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman invites you to a private summit on Pan-African development strategy. Attendance is expected. Your presence signifies cooperation. Expected, not requested. Traoré studied the wording as he stood at his office window overlooking the dry horizon of Burkina Faso. He didn't like the tone. He didn't like the implication. And more than anything, he didn't like being summoned. His advisor Marie entered quietly. Should we decline, sir? Traoré didn't answer immediately. He watched a boy on the road below walking barefoot with a bucket of water twice his size. The weight of that boy's burden looked more honest than the weight of the crown prince's gold. No, Traoré said. We'll go, but not to obey. 3 days later, the jet touched down in Riyadh. The forum was lavish, too lavish. Gold pillars, silk banners, fleets of black SUVs, a sea of cameras. Leaders from across Africa mingled under chandeliers paid for by oil. Inside the Royal Conference Hall, MBS stood beneath an enormous screen flashing slogans: stability, progress, shared leadership. When Traoré entered, every camera turned. The Saudi host smiled warmly but with eyes that measured. Ah, he said in perfect English, the revolutionary himself. Traoré gave a nod. I came for a conversation, not coronation. MBS laughed politely and gestured toward a long table. Then let's talk, my friend. We have a continent to shape. The air shifted. The world didn't know it yet, but Africa's future was about to be debated in a room built with oil and entered with fire. The banquet room glittered, but Traoré saw nothing of value. Plates the size of shields, forks plated in gold, chandeliers that could fund a rural hospital for a decade. Yet among all the extravagance, the thing that unsettled him most was how quiet the African leaders had become. They were there, presidents, ministers, technocrats, all seated politely at the long table, nodding as MBS spoke of partnership and guidance. But none interrupted, none questioned, none challenged. The Crown Prince stood with a glass of sparkling water raised high. We stand at the dawn of a new Africa, MBS declared. One that moves with vision, guided by experience. Saudi Arabia, with its resources, stability, and leadership, will help steer this future. Together, we'll lead Africa into its golden age. Applause followed, eager, safe, except for one man. Traoré did not clap. He simply stared. MBS noticed. He turned his body toward Traoré, his tone shifting into a challenge. President Traoré, he said, surely you agree? Africa benefits when guided by those who've already built greatness. Your country could thrive with our investment, our infrastructure, our know-how. What is revolution without resources? A subtle hush fell over the room. Traoré stood slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You speak of guidance as if we are blind, he began. You speak of leadership as if we are lost. MBS smirked, clearly unthreatened. Not blind, just inexperienced. Traoré's eyes didn't waver. Your Excellency, Africa does not require a shepherd. It requires memory, memory of who we were before maps divided us and hands weighed us down. The silence was now heavier than the chandeliers. He looked across the table at the other African leaders, many of whom avoided his gaze. Africa doesn't need to be led, it needs to be heard. Then, to MBS. We'll lead Africa, you claimed, but Africa leads itself. The room didn't breathe. Cameras kept rolling, and something fundamental had just cracked under the weight of a simple sentence. MBS's smile never left his face, but the warmth had drained from it. He gestured toward the table again, this time more forcefully. Let's sit. No need for dramatic declarations. We're allies here. Traoré sat slowly, never breaking eye contact. He could feel the tension ripple across the table, small, nervous glances, forced laughter, and beneath it all, fear. Not of him, of MBS. The Crown Prince leaned forward, resting both hands on the polished wood. Let me be clear, Mr. President. No nation thrives alone. Saudi Arabia offers not control, but coordination. You want roads, energy, grain independence. We can fund it. We can deliver it. Traoré replied calmly. At what cost? The smile flickered. Africa doesn't need more deals that feed our stomachs while starving our future, Traoré continued. We've walked that road before, with Europe, with the IMF, now with you. MBS's voice dropped lower. You speak of dignity, I speak of reality. The world doesn't wait for the idealist. Traoré picked up a glass of water but didn't drink. No, the world waits for the honest man. That's why I came. To see if you were one. MBS raised an eyebrow. You came for that? Traoré leaned in. I came to listen, but not to obey. The room froze again. Across the table, one African delegate, a young minister from Malawi, dropped her pen. A small, almost imperceptible gesture. But Traoré noticed. It wasn't an accident. It was a signal. Someone was listening. MBS saw it too. He turned his attention to the room. Let me remind everyone here that Saudi Arabia has provided billions in aid across Africa. We don't need to do this. We choose to. Traoré replied instantly. Real friends don't remind you of the debt they paid, only the chains they didn't place. That line hit harder than intended. Several officials around the room exchanged glances. Others stared at their hands, and MBS, for the first time, looked unsure. The cameras were still rolling, but now, it wasn't just the world watching. It was Africa, and for once, she was silent, but awake. After the dinner, a private meeting was arranged. Not requested. Arranged. Two Saudi officials escorted Traoré through a series of ornate corridors lined with imported marble and digital portraits of Saudi megaprojects. Behind one door, silent and shielded from press, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman waited with two aides, seated in a conference room illuminated by low, amber lighting. No cameras this time, just pressure. On the table, a document folder sealed with a gold clip. Traoré sat. No words, no posturing, just presence. MBS gestured toward the folder. A proposal, he said. Full funding for Burkina Faso's national railway project. Zero interest. No repayment for 5 years. Full infrastructure control remains yours. Traoré didn't reach for the folder. What do you want in return? MBS didn't flinch. Military overflight rights. Exclusive energy access. And your voice in the African Union, aligned with ours on specific votes. A silence thicker than stone filled the room. You want a client, Traoré said. No, MBS replied. I want a partner who understands how power works. Traoré finally opened the folder. The contract was detailed. Strategic. Clean. Too clean. And yet, one sentence, buried deep in the footnotes, chilled him. Resource development rights subject to cooperative foreign governance in emergency scenarios. He closed the folder slowly. You built cities in the desert, he said. But still bury chains in your contracts. MBS leaned forward. President Traoré, the world is run by influence, not ideals. If you want to feed your people, you'll need more than speeches. Traoré stood up. My people, he said, have gone hungry before. But they've never sold their land to silence their hunger. Then he placed the unopened pen beside the folder and turned to leave. Is that your final word? MBS called after him. Traoré paused at the door. My word is not for sale. And neither is my country. Behind him, the prince remained silent. Outside, the Riyadh night was calm. But inside the palace, a storm had just begun, not of armies, but of truths neither gold nor oil could control. The following morning, Traoré awoke to murmurs. His security chief, Adama, entered his suite with a phone in hand and a troubled look on his face. Mr. President, he said cautiously, someone leaked part of your meeting with the Crown Prince. It's spreading. Traoré raised an eyebrow. The contract? No, Adama said. Your words. He played the video. It was a short, shaky clip, clearly taken by someone inside the private room, possibly a hidden camera. But the audio was crystal clear. My word is not for sale. And neither is my country. In just 6 hours, the clip had exploded across African social media. Tens of thousands of shares. Millions of views. Reactions flooded in: anger, admiration, disbelief. But not all responses were positive. Across Arab media, a different narrative was forming. Saudi-aligned outlets labeled Traoré ungrateful, reckless, and disrespectful. An editorial in a Riyadh paper asked, "Who does this soldier think he is to challenge a prince?" Meanwhile, back at the Riyadh summit, the atmosphere had shifted. Several African leaders, the same ones who had quietly applauded the prince the night before, now whispered in corners. Some nodded discreetly at Traoré in passing. Others avoided eye contact altogether. During a midday session, an older statesman from East Africa approached him. "You've made enemies," he said quietly. "Powerful ones." Traoré replied calmly. "If truth offends power, it's not truth that must bend." He returned to his seat. Minutes later, a new announcement shocked the delegates. Saudi Arabia was canceling all bilateral meetings scheduled for that afternoon, including development talks with Mali, Senegal, and Burkina Faso. Retaliation. Traoré didn't flinch. But Adama leaned in. "Sir, this might go further. They may try to isolate you. Economically. Politically." Traoré gave a faint smile. "Let them try. My people know the difference between pressure and poison." The summit wasn't over, but the battle lines were drawn. And Ibrahim Traoré had just become the most dangerous kind of man in that palace. A leader who couldn't be bought, and refused to kneel. While tensions rose in Riyadh, something unexpected was happening back home. In Ouagadougou, thousands gathered in front of the presidential palace, not in protest, but in solidarity. They weren't there for food, nor jobs, nor favors. They were there because one sentence, recorded halfway across the continent, had struck like lightning. "Africa leads itself." That single phrase had gone viral. It had been spray-painted on walls in Bamako, chanted in the streets of Accra, printed on T-shirts in Nairobi. And in Burkina Faso, it had become something more. A spark. Local radio stations replayed the clip on loop. Schools turned it into a discussion topic. A small cafe owner near the university taped it above his door with the caption, "Finally, someone speaks like we feel." Marie, Traoré's top advisor, called him from Ouagadougou. Her voice was firm but energized. "Mr. President," she said, "I've never seen the people like this. They're not just proud, they're awake. You started something. Traoré listened in silence, staring out the window of his Riyadh hotel at a skyline built by oil, ruled by silence. "Then we can't stop now," he said. But not everyone back home was celebrating. In an upscale neighborhood near the French embassy, 3 businessmen, Western-trained economists, known for their ties to foreign development firms, were holding a quiet dinner. "He's going to isolate us," one said, swirling his wine. "He already has," another replied. "What investor will come now? He's poisoning our future with pride." But the third, older and quieter, simply stared at the screen showing the viral video. After a pause, he said, "Or maybe, he's curing something that's been killing us quietly for decades." Meanwhile, in Riyadh, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman met privately with senior aides. "He's undermining our strategy," the prince snapped. "And if other leaders follow his tone, we'll lose more than influence." An aide asked cautiously, "What do you want to do?" The prince's eyes narrowed. "Let's remind him that standing alone has consequences." The first domino had been tipped. And somewhere between admiration and retaliation, the fire Traoré lit was now spreading across a continent, and beyond. The next morning, Traoré was informed of a private debriefing with select Saudi officials. It was framed as a courtesy, a final discussion before departure. But when he entered the windowless chamber beneath the summit hall, the tone was anything but cordial. No press. No handshakes. Just 3 senior advisors seated in silence, folders closed, eyes cold. The lead official began, voice low and measured. "Mr. President, our Crown Prince believes in dialogue. But dialogue requires mutual respect. You've challenged not only our hospitality, but our vision." Traoré remained standing. "If your vision requires silence from your guests, it's not partnership. It's theater." Another official leaned forward. "You've inspired unrest. Online activity supporting your words has spiked in nations we heavily invest in. If this rhetoric continues..." Traoré interrupted. "You'll what? Cut ties? Pull funding? Buy someone else to speak softer?" The room stiffened. "We're warning you," the first official said, calm but sharp. "This path leads to isolation. To pressure your nation cannot endure." Traoré slowly stepped forward, placing both hands on the polished table between them. His voice never rose, but it cut like a blade. "Do you think we've not endured before? You threaten me with silence, but I come from a people who've endured centuries of it." He paused. "This time, our silence is over." Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked out, guards scrambling to catch up. Outside, his security chief Adama met him with tense urgency. "Sir. Just got confirmation, 3 major Saudi investment agreements with Burkina Faso were cancelled within the hour." Traoré simply nodded. "Then we are lighter." Back at the summit, whispers turned into phone calls. Ministers from Guinea, Chad, Ethiopia quietly requested side meetings with Traoré's delegation. One envoy said it plainly. "You said what we couldn't. Now they want to hear more." Traoré responded with a slight smile. "Then let's speak. Loudly." A quiet war was now underway, not with weapons, but with words. And in that war, Traoré had just become the most dangerous thing of all. An unshaken voice in a room full of carefully trained echoes. That evening, as the Riyadh Vision Forum neared its conclusion, a final session was held, a televised panel titled "Future Partnerships, Africa and the Gulf." It was meant to be ceremonial. Polished. Predictable. Until Traoré walked onto the stage. He hadn't been scheduled. But after several African leaders quietly requested his inclusion, the organizers had no choice but to let him speak. The moderator, a British-born journalist flown in from Doha, looked visibly tense as she introduced him. "President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. You've recently made headlines. Would you like to clarify your position? Traoré adjusted his microphone, his voice firm and unshaken. I have no need to clarify. I will repeat. He glanced toward the audience, a sea of robes, suits, and flashing cameras. Africa leads itself. A silence. Not awkward. Not hostile. Just heavy. He continued. For decades, we were told we needed instruction. That our development depended on external wisdom. That our futures must pass through other nations' pipelines, plans, and pockets. We've been offered aid with strings. Investments with terms. Partnerships built like cages. His gaze fell briefly on the Saudi delegation, then returned to the crowd. I do not question the right of any nation to pursue its interests. But I reject the idea that Africa must rent its future to finance its present. The moderator tried to interject, but Traoré held the room. I came here because I believe in dialogue. But dialogue cannot exist between a fist and an open hand. Africa is not a prize to be passed between global bidders. It is a continent of sovereign minds, not auctioned loyalties. The crowd was split, some applauded softly. Others sat motionless. But the cameras had caught it all. Within minutes, clips of the speech hit social media. Between a fist and an open hand. Not auctioned loyalties. Hashtags surged, hashtag Africa leads itself, hashtag Traoré speaks, hashtag New African Voice. Backstage, a Gulf official muttered, we should have never given him that microphone. But it was too late. The microphone was no longer his. It now belonged to millions. By dawn, Riyadh was buzzing, but not with celebration. Not with praise. With concern. Inside the royal compound, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman stood before a massive screen replaying Traoré's speech. The room was dim. Curtains drawn. No advisors dared speak first. Finally, the prince turned, voice clipped. He was meant to be an outlier. Now he's a headline. One advisor cleared his throat. Sir, African delegations are now requesting new trade terms. Looser restrictions. Equity stakes. They're emboldened. The prince scoffed. They're misled. But deep down, he knew what had changed. It wasn't policy. It was tone. Meanwhile, back in Ouagadougou, a massive crowd had formed outside the international airport. They weren't protesting. They were waiting. For him. Signs rose above the crowd, Traoré spoke for us. Burkina Faso doesn't kneel. Let Africa speak. As his plane descended, Marie turned to him. You've started something you can't stop now. Traoré didn't blink. I wasn't planning to stop. The airport tarmac became a runway of unity. Farmers. Students. Elders. Ministers. All chanting his name, not as a celebrity, but as a vessel. A vessel for a voice long silenced. But not everyone in the crowd was loyal. Hidden in the shadows, behind a diplomatic SUV, a small drone camera buzzed silently. It transmitted live footage to a discreet intelligence room in a Gulf capital. An operative watched in silence. He returns a hero, the operative muttered. But heroes are mortal. Later that evening, a secret call was placed from a foreign number to a private line in West Africa. We may need to destabilize him internally. Discredit. Divide. We can't let this become doctrine. But across the city, Traoré stood on the presidential balcony, addressing the sea of people below. We are not against the world, he declared. But we are done being beneath it. The roar was deafening. The revolution he ignited wasn't in the streets, not yet. It was in the spine of a continent. Straightening. And those who once whispered commands from afar were now shouting in frustration, because the man they'd underestimated had just rewritten the script. And the cameras were still rolling. 3 weeks had passed since the Riyadh summit, but its tremors had only grown stronger. Across Africa, university lectures quoted Traoré's speech. Students painted murals of him beside Thomas Sankara and Patrice Lumumba. In Kenya, a viral chant echoed through a crowd. "We are not for sale." But in global boardrooms, his name caused tension. In a leaked audio call from a European development agency, a voice muttered, "We had control. Now we have Traoré." Meanwhile, in Riyadh, MBS sat in private conference with Western allies. "He's dangerous," said a French envoy. "Not because of weapons. Because of ideas." MBS nodded slowly. "Ideas are harder to silence than armies." Back in Burkina Faso, Traoré was preparing for his next address. Not to foreign leaders. To his own people. He had decided to reveal the pressure campaigns. The withheld investments. The threats of isolation. His advisors were divided. Some urged caution. But Traoré's response was clear. If the truth is dangerous, let it be heard louder. That night, in front of a national audience, he took the stage. "My brothers and sisters," he began, "what we're building is not a rebellion. It is a restoration. Restoration of dignity. Of ownership. Of direction." He revealed documents, secret memos, communications, economic threats made behind closed doors. The crowd gasped. Not out of fear. Out of clarity. "They offered gold in one hand, chains in the other," he said. "We refused both." The speech was streamed live across dozens of countries. In Saudi Arabia, MBS watched from his private office. His advisors anxiously awaited his response. He turned off the screen. "He's not a soldier," the prince said, almost admiringly. "He's a signal." No one spoke. "And when you try to crush a signal," MBS continued, "you only prove it exists." The next morning, the New York Times ran a front-page headline. "Rolled-up newspaper, a rebel's revolution, Traoré redefines Africa's voice." But in Ouagadougou, Traoré read none of it. He stood by the window, hands behind his back, looking out at a nation waking up with a little more fire in its chest. Marie entered the room. "You've become more than a president, Ibrahim." He didn't turn. "Then I hope I remain human." She smiled. "You're not just standing up to kings now. You've become one. The people crowned you." He finally looked at her, calm but firm. "Then I serve, not rule." And in the capital, the people began calling him by a new name. Not general. Not rebel. But the flame. Because he didn't just fight back. He lit the way. In a world where influence is bought, borrowed, or stolen, one man chose to build it, from within. Traoré didn't overthrow kings. He exposed their fear. He didn't scream revolution. He whispered truth, and it echoed louder than any army. Against the power of palaces, pipelines, and promises, he stood with nothing but conviction, and that was enough. Because sometimes, one flame is all it takes to burn down an illusion. And while others traded loyalty for luxury, Traoré gave his people something rarer. A leader who refused to kneel, even when the whole world expected him to. He walked into Riyadh alone. He walked out with a continent behind him. This isn't just a story about politics. It's about legacy. And those brave enough to write their own. Because in the end, power isn't what you take. It's what you awaken.